Welcome to the Diamond Hands podcast, where medicine meets momentum and branding becomes a leadership system. I'm Leslie Tracy Kratitchville, co-founder of Diamond Hands Media. I build aesthetic brands that lead, with a background in employee benefits and business finance, so brand becomes authority and asset value. This is mindset, money, and marketing for founders building brands that run without them. Because brand isn't a logo, it's how you lead.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Diamond Hands podcast. Today, you guys are in for a treat. I know you guys are all up in NewBeauty magazine, and some of you may have actually gone to their recent event or what have you, but we have Mike Glaicar, who is the CEO of NewBeauty with us. Hey. And he has spent the past 6 years at NewBeauty, and he currently serves as the CEO overseeing NewBeauty's core business as well as Beauty Pass and Beauty Engine, which we're going to get into a little bit later. And prior to joining NewBeauty, Mike actually spent several years in healthcare publishing at MJH Life Sciences and Time, and at Fast Company magazine. He was leading their technology and finance partnerships. So guys, we have like a real business person here, not a fake one. But Mike is passionate about leveraging aesthetic consumer data to help brands and physicians better serve their patients. Because as we always talk about, we are here and we exist for the public. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're here. So, to get into it a little bit, tell us first about, how did you even get into media and why is media so important?
It's funny. I grew up in Canada. I was telling you, I came down here to the United States to play hockey at Quinnipiac University, and I ended up playing a year afterwards and didn't know what I wanted to do. Fell into a random role at MJH Life Sciences, and that was one of the largest privately held medical publishing companies in the U.S. And I realized really quickly the media side. I mean, it's not just about advertising and the business side of it, but it's really about education. And so for us, educating healthcare professionals, educating consumers, it really has an ability to impact an entire industry. So I fell in love with publishing years ago. Was fortunate enough to go to Fast Company magazine, which is obviously all about entrepreneurship. Love Fast Company, and then I actually got the entrepreneurial itch myself. Started a startup in the tech space, which led me to my role at NewBeauty. So all things came together.
Wow. And, and with that, so you're obviously in that whole, you had some of that startup mentality yourself. However, when you got into NewBeauty and you went from chief revenues officer to CEO and everything, like tell me a little bit more about the impetus that NewBeauty had behind creating, these, the state of the industry reports that you guys kind of like create every year, the aesthetics report. So tell us a little bit more about that and why you guys focus so heavily on data.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been here 6 years now, and obviously not the typical beauty consumer. I've learned it over the past 6 years. But what I was so interested in and intrigued by when I came and met with Adam Sando, who's our chairman, NewBeauty was this publication that people loved. They really loved the publication. It wasn't like they passively read NewBeauty. It's like they considered it the beauty Bible, right? And so when you have that relationship with the consumer, it gives you a really unique opportunity to not just have a one-way conversation, which I think a lot of publications do, right? They write articles, they're read by thousands of people, that's great, but actually have a two-way communication with the reader. So we launched something called Beauty Pass about a year after I joined. It's an SMS-based membership program, invite only. We have now about 85,000 members across the US, very engaged. They try products through us. They get recommendations for physicians and treatments through us. And then on the back of that, we do a lot of studies, and we built a business called Beauty Engine, which is our market research arm. What I love about that was getting in the heads of thousands of beauty consumers. So we're not guessing about what to write about or guessing about which products are best or procedures are best. We're actually getting the data from those consumers. And then we built the state of aesthetics reports to share that back to med spas and derms and plastics and physicians across the country to help them better serve the patient.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. So, like, how does a doctor or a nurse get on the inside and become part of the beauty engine and network? Like, what do they got to do?
Well, interestingly enough, so Beauty Pass is the invite only membership. It's something that we kept very close to us because, we want to have the highest quality consumers as part of this membership, right? And so we do actually invite many of our consumers through physician offices that we partner with. That's a big channel for us. But as far as the research goes, when we first launched it, we took for granted how much data we had, right? It was very easy for us to get thousands of consumers to give feedback on, their experience with fillers or toxins or, in-office treatments, other in-office treatments and procedures. But when we shared that data with the physicians, they went crazy for it, right? And we were asked to speak all around the country because for them to get this insight from thousands of consumer, is like the missing key that many of them needed to run the practice. Right. So we have an amazing distribution list. Physicians, as far as the state of aesthetics, med spas can actually reach out to NewBeauty directly and we'll send them a copy of the reports and the data included. But it's nice because the data is not just for the practitioner, it's for the office staff as well. And we'll get into some of the data with you, but it's amazing how much the front office staff fundamentally changes the overall experience for the consumer. And it's not just about their results, right? It's actually about the overall experience for that consumer. And that's what we find in our data.
So before I even go any further on any other data that you guys may have spoken about or that you guys have put out, I do want to talk about that white glove kind of concierge service that, you and your team really espouse as the way for a practice to go from level 5 to level 10. Talk about some of that data and also what do patients want to see?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because when we first started getting this data, we said, okay, consumers, if they get great results, they're happy, right? Like that's fine. What we realized in the data was the great results were table stakes. That was the expectation from the consumer. The overall experience from a front office staff, everything from when they, book a consultation, when they come in, the instructions when they come, all of that sort of stuff built their overall experience. And even if they had great results, but a terrible experience, they rated that visit poorly, right? And so things like, making it very easy to book consultations. I still know of offices that are not doing online booking, right? And so that makes it very difficult for the consumer. Consumers don't want to pick up the phone, right? They want to be able to do it online. And for the consumers who do, of course, that they should have that option as well. But that was something that was very simple. Text messaging, right? We saw text messaging grow to be the most popular communication source for our consumers. So I talk to a lot of offices and say, do you guys text with your patients? Do you have that set up? Are you automating that text the morning of their appointment? Are you sending them something to give them directions and give them instructions? And many of these offices didn't, right? And they said like, we email them. And everyone said like, we don't want to receive emails anymore. We have thousands of emails that are unread. So things as simple as that. And then once the consumer came into the office, and this is why I think there's been such a rise in med spa as far as experience over the past few years, they wanted to be treated like it was almost like a mini vacation, right? They wanted to be welcomed by name. They want to come in there. They want to be educated while they wait. There's obviously products generally that are sold in these locations. They didn't want to necessarily just be left to their own device to be, on their phone for a half an hour. Wait times, of course, is something that's hard to manage. But while that consumer can wait, what a great opportunity to give them a 5-star experience. Even some of the things like, coffees and drinks and the extra things in the office, they seem to go a long way with these consumers.
I can imagine. I was giving one of my own experiences. For example, I booked a facial for a med spa, which was supposed to be this morning. Anyways, like early this morning. And, and I was like, I did not get a confirmation email or text or anything. And so I called and, I was like, hey, do I have an appointment this morning? Just to making sure I wasn't crazy. They're like, oh, we forgot to put it on the calendar, whatever, we'll send you the thing. And I was like, this is crazy. Like basically I got something, but didn't put it automatically on my calendar. Like I didn't get a confirmation test to say like, okay, this is when your appointment's going to be and so those things do go a long way. Am I going to go? Yeah. Cause I know the esthetician I go all the time, but still those things are very important. So like before someone, okay, in your experience with the data, when someone comes in, besides having drinks there and things, you talk about entertaining someone or educating someone rather when they're waiting for their appointment. How can someone facilitate that in a practical way? Like what tools, I know you can't really endorse anyone, but what tools have you found that actually help with those things?
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, I don't know if you're experiencing this, but I see this across the board. It's not just aesthetics. the bar has been set so low as far as customer service right now and customer experience that just doing anything kind of sets you apart. And our data showed that the number one turnoff that consumers had in office, and this is not a shot at any of the physicians out there, but was a doctor's poor bedside manner. So that was their number one thing that they had experienced, right? So of
Yeah.
course, that's a whole nother topic, right? But the second thing, most significant thing that they'd experienced was poor or unhelpful or rude office staff, right? And that was a significant number of our consumers had experienced that. So to say, like, we're not necessarily saying go crazy over the top, but be friendly when they come in. We've all experienced that. You go into an office and the office staff is there typing away. They don't really give you the time of day. They almost act like you're a nuisance being there, right? So be friendly, be welcoming, right? But the other thing, like you had mentioned, okay, you didn't get a confirmation text or any sort of communication. And that's fine, maybe because you've been there multiple times, but imagine you're a first-time patient. And imagine you're someone who doesn't really know where the office is or doesn't know how to get to through the hallways to that office door, whatever it might be. That's a poor experience that someone can have right off the get-go. And then as far as some of the tools, one of the conferences recently had the Ritz-Carlton put on their training. And if people have not done that training, I have no connection with them, but I've done it. It is so incredible that the Ritz-Carlton training that they do, management training and hospitality training. And I think one of the biggest things that they really harp on is making everyone feel like they are the featured guest, right? So you go to a Ritz-Carlton and there might be thousands of guests staying there. They're talking to you and they're welcoming you by name, right? They're remembering things about you. All those little things that seem so small. If you do those, especially now in 2024, when again, globally, the service level is so low, it just makes a big difference. And ultimately, what I always try and tell the practices that we work with is you don't want a happy patient, you want a raving fan, right? You want a raving fan, someone that comes out and goes, oh my gosh, Dr. So-and-so is incredible. The staff is the best, because then they leave and they tell all their friends and family, and that's free marketing. And the best practices that we work with, they have raving fans, not just customers.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing because walking into a practice and they anticipate the time you're coming in. Hi, Mike. Welcome into Fiji Med Spa. I'm looking at my water. Welcome. We're so excited to see you today. It makes a difference. And say in the soft notes, soft notes are your friend, guys. So if they put in things like, oh, they really love, say they know in advance that they love Poland Springs water when they come in, or they love a coffee if they have a coffee maker. Like, hey, I know you like coffee. Would you like one today? Those little things will make that person feel so warm and fuzzy inside. It's just a little tiny thing. So it doesn't have to be everything. And so how can that type of thing be worked into the process? Because I think this is the biggest thing that practitioners I work with have the issue with. How do you make this into a process? Because they're crazy, frazzled, running around. Not everyone has an MA, and so they're preparing all the things before the person comes in, or they don't have a process. How do they make that a process?
Well, first and foremost, I think making sure the office staff knows how important they are is key, right? So when we showed this data to a lot of these practices, it was like a light bulb went off and they're like, oh my gosh, and this is for the office staff themselves. I said, like, my role is really important, right? That's crucial, because if you actually have office staff that feel pride in how much their role matters to the overall patient experience, right? And not just feeling like they're doing administrative work, but really feel like they are the first person, and they're the person that really has the most impact on overall experience. I think that kind of sets the tone right off the bat. But as far as process, like you mentioned, there has to be process in place that really like indicates every small detail. I'll give you an example. At Ritz-Carlton, they have to say your name at least 3 times by the time you get to the bell desk, right? So when you check in, they ask who you are. As soon as you're valeting the car, they radio that ahead, right? Now the person that's walking through with your luggage to the front desk is saying your name again. When you get to that front desk, they're welcoming you with your name. It's a small thing like that, right? But that's part of their process, okay? They put everything in the soft notes. So if you talk about a consumer who's, an amazing guest of Ritz-Carlton who's been there many, many times, they can check into a Ritz-Carlton in Hong Kong. And if they like Diet Coke, there's going to be Diet Coke in their room in Hong Kong. It doesn't matter where they're in the world. And that experience is incredible. You look at other companies that do a good job of this, like the Lufthansa Airlines is a good example, right? If you look at that premium experience with Lufthansa or Emirates, right?
Yeah.
It's not the most expensive things that they're doing, But the women, when they check in first class, are receiving a rose when they check in, and a beautiful kit and a robe and all this sort of stuff, right? It costs them barely anything compared to the $12,000, first class ticket that you might be paying. But that's the piece that is like the major, difference in terms of experience. So I think for practices, yes, having a process in place, everything from the small details. When a consumer books an appointment, when do we follow up with them? How do we follow up the day of? Do we make phone calls afterwards to follow up? Which I think a lot of offices really focus on that, which is good. But then the consumer comes in or the patient comes in. What's their experience when they walk in? How do we greet them? What do we say? Which notes do we take down? All those sorts of things need to be documented. And yes, it's going to be difficult for staff to always focus and follow that perfectly, but at least you have that to fall back on. So when something falls short, you can always go back to that document.
Yeah. And then even with, you talked about how making sure your team is taken care of, and then your team will take care of, again, guys, the public. So going back to that, so not just telling them that they're awesome or whatever, how do you reinforce those positive behaviors? 'Cause I'm sure you guys do that at NewBeauty in order to get a certain level of success from your team. So how do you positively reinforce those behaviors so that this becomes culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'll talk a little bit about intrapreneurship in a bit, but I think it all kind of comes full circle. Intrapreneurship being like the entrepreneurs within your organization, right? An ownership culture is something that we love to promote at NewBeauty, but also with our practices that we work with, meaning that there are people on staff that have ownership over certain things, right? So let's say you have someone that has ownership over patient experience. They own that patient experience, and you kind of test them a little bit and push them to say, what would a 10-star or a 5-star experience look like? I know Airbnb does this exercise, but what would a 6-star, 7-star, 8-star? Like, what would that experience look like, that ideal experience look like for our patients? And you kind of give them a little bit of leeway to say, like, build that out. You own customer experience, right? That, to me, that ownership culture, and then maybe someone else on the staff owns follow-up, and someone else on the staff owns referrals, like whatever that might be, feeling that sense of ownership over something really important is crucial. And then when you get feedback that a patient had an amazing experience, or you look at your reviews online and they talked about that amazing experience, you can go back to that staff member who owns patient experience. And, whether it might be incentivizing them in some capacity, but even giving them positive feedback that they are owning customer experience, and that customer experience was fantastic. That's what people need. I think when you have staff that doesn't feel a sense of ownership, they lose a little bit of meaning in their work. They feel like they're just kind of going through the motions, versus someone that says, like, patient experience is up to me. I'm going to make sure the rest of my teammates are doing their thing and doing it right. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm following up as a leader of this specific area. I think that's crucial.
That is crucial, and in that ownership mentality and creating the entrepreneurs. So guys, people in your practice, they can have the same drive as you, just in a different way, because not every person is meant to build a business. Some people are meant to be the most amazing part of your business. Just like, you have a human body, you have the hands, you have the face, you have the legs, you have all the different parts, but they're all super important. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, people will talk about, oh yeah, my staff, my this, my that. And they talk about them in this kind of elitist type of way. And I'm like, people will not be coming into your practice unless they're greeting them, unless they're talking to them on the phone and all that. And it's like, because you can't scale if everything's just using on concierge. It's like, if you're depending on your team, you have to give up some of that leadership.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, you hear a lot of practices talk about the staff like it's a difficult part of the business. And by the way, it's not easy. It's not easy to manage people in any ways, right? But as in, it's almost like a burden. And I think you have to switch that mentality as an owner, business owner, and say, actually, they are the business, right? They are the business, right? There's much of the business as I am. So I don't look at the staff and management team as something that is different than me because I'm the business owner. They are the business, right? And I think, like, these practices are only as good as their people. And so giving that sense of ownership, that sense of freedom and sense of pride with the staff, where they really feel like they can have an impact on the business, is great. And you brought up something interesting too. As an entrepreneur, someone who's been an entrepreneur in the past, and someone who's generally pretty entrepreneurial minded, sometimes you think that everyone thinks the same way as you, meaning Everyone wants to be a business owner. Oh, the staff is going to, but being a business owner is really tough. And some people love to be a number two and they're a great number two. And other people love to be in a supportive role and they're fantastic at that. And they should never be an entrepreneur, but they can still have that, what I call entrepreneurship mindset, which is, what would you do if you own this business, right? If you own this business, what would you do every single day? And when they get that mentality, oh my gosh, it changes the game completely. Everything from expense control, right? Like when we talk about expenses as a team, if you own the business, would you spend money on that? Oh, maybe I wouldn't. Okay, great. Like that's how you should be thinking, right? And so if you get the staff thinking in that way, it's a game changer.
Yeah, I could definitely imagine that it is. And there was something else that that touched my brain and it just flew away. And with that too, team meetings are very crucial. I know that team meetings are crucial because, you talk about that positive feedback loop. It's not just because some people love and also kind of figuring out, like you said, not everyone's the same. Some people have different temperaments. Some people really love to be praised in front of other people. Some people will run away and be like, "Oh my God, like I can't believe my manager praised me in front of everyone," and they get embarrassed. And so how do you kind of temper those personality differences when you're leading a team? Is it in the one-on-ones? Like how do you kind of call that information so you do it in a way that's respectful to the way that they like to be praised, while also understanding that, yeah, we need to say this publicly because other people need to know that they're doing this good work too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think a great manager always manages each individual in a unique way, right? Like I think the blanket strategy of managing everyone the same way has never worked, and I think it's an easy way out, right? To just be manage across the board. But if you get to know each and every person on your staff, and by the way, to your point, some people are really motivated by rewards or accolades. Other people it's just money, right? And so you need to kind of know that too, right? Because if you give someone a shout out in a call or in a meeting and then you're not giving them a raise, like they're going to leave, right? Other people, they don't care as much about the money, which, is maybe hard to understand for some people, but they really want the recognition. They want the growth. They want the training. So I think getting to know that early on when you hire an employee is crucial. And I don't think asking those questions is a bad thing. I think sometimes managers, they want to try and figure that out. Like they try and play psychologists. I always say, right, it's like, let me see how I should manage this person. A lot of times, if you have an open and honest relationship with your employees, you can ask them, right? Like, what really incentivizes you? What gets you excited? What do you really want to do here? What do you want to do in your career, right? And figure that out from the get-go, and then you tailor your management style throughout. But I definitely think the one size fits all has never worked in management, and I think it's crucial that business owners, again, kind of going back to understanding that the people are the business, they take the time to get to know the staff and then they manage each staff member accordingly.
I think that's excellent. The one thing I want to ask you too, with that, I've come from places where, sometimes they'll do like, personality assessments or whatever. Like, what do you think are the positives and also maybe some of the negatives of some of these assessments that are out there? Like, how much should we use these when we're working with a team versus, like you said, trying to figure out what someone likes? Because, the thing is too, some people don't even know themselves.
Right.
So
That's
in that case, being a leader, understanding that sometimes people don't even know themselves, how can we kind of like bridge that gap between, hey, we have this assessment we want you to take, and also just getting to know them in one-on-ones and seeing how they interact with the team?
Yeah, it's a good point that some people don't know their own preferences, right? Which is interesting to say, but there's some great technologies out there now. I think, there's a company called Sure People, it's a startup technology company that is an assessment tool, but it's not meant pre-hire. It's not you're not doing like, this disc assessment that's going to say, am I going to, give you a promotion or not? It's all kind of about how people interact with each other. So that's one people should check out. It's called, again, Sure People. That is really a kind of an in-depth survey, and they call it this Prism survey that you take, and basically you kind of figure out how do you interact with others, and you can kind of now go throughout your organization. If I have a conflict with some other staff member, kind of ideally, how would I approach that? So there's great tools like that out there, but I think on top of that, of course, has to come just intuition, right? And sometimes, by the way, it's trial and error. You can see if you give someone a shout out in a meeting and they're really embarrassed, and you can tell that they didn't take it. Well, that's not going to be the end of the world, but maybe for next time to do it a little bit more in front. So I think there is trial and error. But listen, any good manager has a level of intuition, I think. They can kind of feel the room. if you don't have that and people like can't read the room, I mean, that's tough as a manager. Maybe you need to hire, and we've seen that a lot, and maybe you need to hire someone that does, but a good level of intuition is pretty important.
Yeah, a good level of intuition. Because I have seen sometimes people, doctors that will have like say like a wonderful esthetician who's a great esthetician, or they'll be like, "Hey, I'm growing, become my manager," and it's like but that person may not know how to lead, and so I do think it's important whoever we are putting in position to kind of be the voice of ours when we're not in the room, making sure that they get that training that they need so that they can be effective leaders, because leadership development is it's something that's very, very lacking, I think, in our industry, because it's like, if people were leaders, they wouldn't be talking about other people. They wouldn't be doing all this backbiting stuff. That's not the quality of a leader or a person of integrity. So I think leadership development is something that's lacking, and everyone could use more of it. Entrepreneurs to people that we hire as practice managers and all that. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
No, 100%. I think leadership training is crucial, not just for managers, even people who are pre-manager level, right? Like kind of understanding that, because the earlier you can get some of those traits. And the other thing I talk a lot about is managing up, right? So even if you're not in a manager role, understanding, how do I manage my manager? How do I set expectations? How do I come to them with solutions instead of problems? Whatever it might be, that some of those tactics that you're using to help manage up, first of all, it's going to be your best bet if you want to get promoted as a staff member. But then once you become that manager, you really know like the expectations of those that you're managing, right? So I think that's crucial, that everyone, regardless of their role, should have some level of leadership training, which is important. It's oftentimes overlooked. There's lots of budget considerations as well for some of these offices, and so it can be tough to put in place. But there's so many tools now, online tools, that don't necessarily take someone away for a weekend course or take them away for a week. They can do these things kind of in their own time, and there's some pretty engaging tools. Even things like Masterclass, right, is a good platform for little tips and tricks. That takes no time. It's kind of entertaining for the consumer, or for the employee who's ended up consuming this content. And maybe that's even looked at as an investment that your practice is making in your employees to pay for certain subscriptions like that.
Yeah, I mean, what's $15 a month, if you have 15 to 20 employees,
Right.
I mean, I think it's a great investment. And so, I love this. So kind of going back to the people that we're all here for, the public. I'm going to go into that. So it's like, there's been, and I know you guys have the data on this, but there's been a real shift towards like, clean and ethical beauty, and also focusing more on skincare and things. So like, where do you see the data going in these directions? And where do you think practices should be focusing on based on the current data?
Our current data shows this big shift towards health involved in everything, right? So skincare is now skin health, right? Even looking at things like neurotoxins as an example, seeing that as this preventative, which we've talked about for years, right? But this preventative thing to help my skin be healthier for longer, right? Hair health, all these sort of trends is really focused around health. I think there's going to be a huge wave, again, based on our data, on diet as well. Like we're seeing a lot of content coming out right now that are putting some major concerns and questions in place in terms of our diet, and the red 40 in our food and the other chemicals in our food and all these sorts of things. So I think it's going to be important that as practices, we really talk about the health side as well, and making sure that we're carrying clean products, and that, we're able to kind of speak to the ethically sourced, components of certain products. So that's really crucial. The other piece that's really important, of course, GLP-1s are everywhere at this point. We see a significant portion in our data of consumers who are either taking them or plan to take them in the future, to the tune of about 30% of our readers are either taking GLP-1s or plan to take them in the future, right? It's a big, big number. And so you look at that's a huge trend. It's still ongoing, but it does come with side effects, right? 30% of our consumers on GLP-1s are reporting hair thinning or hair loss. So great opportunity for some of these aesthetic practices. Many are seeing a reduction in skin quality in terms of texture. So there's things that we can address there as well. And then, of course, which is the obvious, but when you lose fat indiscriminately and you have Ozempic face, right, or Ozempic butter, all these things that are kind of side effects, I think there's opportunities for consumers to make sure that, or for practices to talk to consumers and address some of these concerns. So that's the second big trend. The last big trend that I think is going to be massive is hormone health. Women's health and hormone health is everywhere right now. The conversation around menopause, which I'm so glad it is for our readers, is finally coming to a head where people feel comfortable talking about menopause. And I don't know why it was this case. Obviously, it's a private issue, but for years and years, it was kind of this taboo thing nobody talked about. There are a lot of great companies coming to the forefront now that are helping to address some of these symptoms of menopause and helped kind of address hormone health concerns. I think if practices are not up on that right now, they should figure out how to become educated, partner with the experts there. But that's going to be a huge wave.
Wow, it's so interesting to talk about that. I was actually just at a small symposium, and Cindy, the founder of the pink pill or what have you, she
Okay.
was talking about, she sold her business for like 1.5 billion and then bought it back. Like I was like, whoa, I was like, you're intense. And she recently, I think partnering with MERS or whatever, they're doing like a nationwide like rollout. But it's just like, that whole thing that had, perimenopause, menopausal women, and all the symptoms that go along with that. And I also see a lot of my practitioners, like, they might do like a bio tea, or they start going into like, the hormone replacement therapies and things, because it's like all those things have to be addressed, especially you have an aging population. So all the millennials, we're about 7-8 years away from menopause. Ooh, crazy. But it's the truth. So yeah, so I do think that holistic healthcare, because when you're going to an office and they care about your whole health, I'm sure there's going to be higher adherence, and then, the more stickability. However, then my other question to you, if these aesthetic practitioners are taking on this holistic healthcare approach, where does that leave a PCP and all these, like, where does it leave those types of things? I do know some aesthetic providers who do run complete blood panels and all those things when someone comes in.
I think, listen, the landscape is going to shift drastically, but we've kind of already seen that, right? Like, look at weight management as an example of how many aesthetic practices are now offering weight management that didn't 1 year ago or 2 years ago, right? Now, what you want to make sure that we do is reduce any confusion for the consumer to say, like, who's the real expert here, and where do I go for this, and where do I go for that? So, I think if offices are going to expand into those areas, they better make sure they have the best experts involved, right? Like, this is not something you get into, on a whim, especially hormone health that can have a major, major impact on the consumer's lives. So I think, it's going to be important that the consumer understands who the experts are in these fields, but that's not to say that aesthetic practices can't form partnerships or bring that expertise in to be that kind of one-stop shop. And I just think as a consumer, when you find a physician that you trust and cares for you, you want to stay with that physician as well, right? Like, that's this continuity of care that you can have from one physician. So I think it creates a better overall consumer experience if we can keep some sort of continuity of care there, or at least making recommendations to experts who you really know and trust, right? But certainly there is going to be some education needed for the consumer.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the one thing that I think about. Patients go on TikTok and they go on YouTube and they go on Instagram, and everyone is an expert, it seems, and they're spewing their own information. Not spewing, that's a very negative word, but they're bringing forth their own information. And it's just like, who do we listen to? Because my doctor is talking about this stuff, but now my aesthetic injectable provider is talking about this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, so I agree with you there that there has to be that distinction made. It's like, where does the expertise lie? Because I think I love specialists, because, as people become more specialized in what they're doing in their practices, it's okay if someone's not good at everything. And I also caution, because I know some practices that they try to do everything.
Right.
But then by trying to do everything, they confuse their patient, their consumer, and they don't end up doing much except the basics because people are confused.
I like this concept of pods. I always have. At NewBeauty, we've talked a lot about that, right? And of course, on NewBeauty, we are all about board certification, right? And that's really crucial for us. But creating these pods where where you might have a plastic surgeon who has a great relationship with a local dermatologist, who has a great relationship with a cosmetic dentist, right? Who has a great relationship with a hair specialist. And they kind of build these little pods where they refer patients to each other, but they have expertise in that specific area, right? And I think sometimes it becomes challenging where an office can feel territorial and say, I want this consumer for everything, right? But let's think about the overall patient care and make sure that if you don't have expertise in your office, don't pretend to have it. Either bring in an expert into the practice, right? Get that expertise, or maybe refer that patient within your pod or network of experts that are local. Because I think we've all experienced asking a physician a question and they're not an expert there. And they say, you should go see a dermatologist for that. Who do I go see? You can look it up on our site, who might also be covered on their, like, that's the recommendation. No, the recommendation needs to be, here's so-and-so. I know them. I trust them. I send all my patients there. Like, if you're going to build these relationships, I think that's crucial. But I still like that concept. Now, if it is going to be a full kind of full experience in one office, the flip side of that could be beneficial is you may have a consumer who would never go to another physician to talk about hormone health, right? So if you don't offer that in your office, they're not going to go. Like, that's it. They go to you, they leave. You can tell them to go see, an endo or whatever it might be. They're not going to go. So maybe by offering that in your office, you actually give someone care that they wouldn't have seen elsewhere. So there's kind of two sides to that conversation.
Yeah, and I guess it's something that we just have to see as time goes on. And, speaking of like forecasts, where do you see things going as far as like where consumers are spending their money and where they're going to expand in the next year going into 2025? So I know this is a slow season for some, not slow season. We just got out of the slow season. We're in the busy season now, rather. But like, where do you anticipate consumers putting their dollars when it comes to beauty treatments in 2025?
So some of the trends that we're seeing are interesting. Many of the practices, this is not a secret, right? But filler has been down in terms of demand for many of the practices that we've talked to. And our data shows that we've seen about a 6% decrease in the past 6 months alone in terms of our readers that are planning to have filler treatments. So,
Yeah.
I think we've seen a few different causes of that. Social media is tough for filler, right? You can have a consumer who has a bad filler experience posted on social media. And of course, now thousands of people are seeing it, if not millions of people are seeing that and really turned off from that. I do think for years, the best physicians have always done a good job of finding balance in terms of filler, right? But you do have some practitioners who have overfilled consumers, right? And so as a result, a consumer looks overfilled, their friends see them and say, what did you have done? I had this filler, and they don't want that, right? So I think it's going to be crucial that we think long-term if we're talking about fillers and make sure that we find balance for that individual consumer and that we don't overfill. So that's one trend we're seeing in a decline. On the flip side, increased demand is biostimulators, right? So you look at some of the, Sculptras and Radius of the world, like there seems to be more interest in that than ever. And I think part of that is our body's own ability to create these collagen structures, right? And create this in ourselves. That goes back to what you had mentioned earlier about this trend towards health, right? That seems like put your body to work and build it yourself seems a little bit more natural than putting some sort of filler in your face, right? So those are some of the trends that we're seeing. Certainly, GLP-1s are having a major effect on it. The cost of GLP-1s, we saw a significant number of our readers who are not price sensitive, by the way. Our readers are not overly price sensitive, but who have cut back on certain aesthetic treatments and procedures because of the cost of their GLP-1s. However, they have said that once they get to their goal weight or near their goal weight, they do want to ramp back up spend. So that's been an interesting piece as well. And then lastly, as far as GLP-1s and some of the trends there, we do see it as a bit of a foundation and a bit of a springboard for some consumers. So some consumers who have not had aesthetic treatments and procedures, who may have felt overweight and haven't felt overly confident in themselves, are now getting on GLP-1s, getting down closer to their goal weight, feeling good, eating healthier, going to the gym, reduce caloric intake, which of course makes sense just based on the MOA of the GLP-1s, right? But now they're coming into aesthetics for the first time because they're like, I feel good about myself and I want to do X, Y, and Z next. Right. So I do think that that's an opportunity that physicians should be talking to their patients about.
Yeah, 100%. Because that goes back to what we talked about just now, that holistic treatment, treating the whole entire person. You start getting snatched and you want to get snatched at always. You want to get some lips. You might get some hair. You might get some lashes. You're going to want to put together everything so you have the full effect because you're closer to your quote unquote ideal self because everyone has an ideal self and everybody wants to feel good. And if we think about it, this is like, it's not just blanket things, but when someone feels good from the inside out, it's a beautiful thing. So aesthetic providers, from doctors to NPs to PAs, have such an amazing role. It's such an amazing role, I think.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that because I don't come from the beauty industry. And if you're from outside the beauty industry, you might see beauty as vain and very topical, right? But when you, especially as we have access to thousands and tens of thousands of consumers, when you start to hear more about their experience, when they say, I had this treatment and procedure done, and I hadn't felt good about going out in public for years, and now I felt great, and I go out with my friends, and I want to go to dinner, and I want to go to these parties, and whatever it might be, it fundamentally changes someone's life. And so it's not this topical shallow thing. It really is all about overall life experience. So I think we need to, as practitioners in this space, the practitioners need to realize too, they have that overall impact on the person's life, not just on how they look.
Exactly. Then the last question I want to ask you is, as consumer behaviors and trends and everything continue to change, because they always do, how can practices strive to remain relevant without sacrificing integrity as things change over time?
So let's talk a little bit about social media because I think that that plays right into that, right? When we first started doing our surveys, we had single digit percent of our consumers who went to TikTok as an example to help do research on their aesthetic provider. Right now, it's like 25% of our readers are going to TikTok to do research on their aesthetic providers, right? So that's a huge number. We have millions of consumers across the country. Now, when we talk to a lot of physicians, they say, "Well, I'm not a TikToker. I don't do my little dances. I don't do," that's what they think of as TikTok, right? My recommendation always is if you're a singer, sing. If you're a dancer, dance. Like play your role. If that's not you, don't try and be the funny physician on TikTok doing the dances if that's not you. And by the way, it's not to say if that is you and you have this personality, you want to show off your personality, great. There's no problem with that either, right? But when we asked our consumers what do they want to see most from their physicians on social media, it was education over entertainment. So education was key. Like educate me, right? And you see actually a lot of these accounts, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever it might be, that are really rooted in education. Like that's what I want to see from the practices. And one of the challenges that practices get into this kind of vortex on is how many likes did I get? What was the reach on this, right? And then you ask them, "Oh, well, what was the impact of that?" "Well, I got so many likes on this post." "Okay, well, what does that mean?" "Okay, you got a lot of likes on a dancing video. What value did you provide to the consumer? How many more patients did you get for that?" Right? So we shouldn't be chasing that KPI. We should be chasing the KPI of overall impact. So yes, social media can be a great lead generation source for your practice, but also if you're a practice in San Diego and you have someone who likes and really gets value out of your content from Dallas, and they're never going to come see you. Still, as a physician, you're providing value to more people through this platform than you ever would have in the past. And I think that should be the overall KPI, not how many likes or what the reach is.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Makes me think of an old adage that says like a rising tide lifts all the ships, and it's just like that's so true because as you contribute to the tide with each and every one of your educational pieces or what have you, not only does the respect for you go up, but the respect for the industry as a whole, which I think is super important that is not corroded by too much entertainment.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think we become very competitive in aesthetics, right? It's my practice versus the other practice, but we need to realize we're all in this together. Bad outcomes, bad experience hurts everybody. Like that is the ultimate thing that we should be really trying to push against. And so we need to realize that we do support each other in this industry. And by the way, if you are an expert and you help someone through social media by giving them a tip or trick on skincare, whatever it might be, and that person never gets to your office or they never contact you and you never see them again, you're still adding value. And as human beings and as physicians, like physicians should be looking to do that across the board. As human beings, we should be looking to do that across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I know I said that's the last thing. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that our listeners really take away from today? I know we touched upon some really great stuff, but is there anything else that you think as a last hurrah?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is I think the industry is in a unique position right now, right? We kind of had this gold rush where we had, so much demand for aesthetic treatments and procedures post COVID. And with any gold rush, you get a lot of entrants coming into the space, right? And now I think there's a bit of a concern of oversupply in terms of locations, right? Whether it's, derms, plastics, or med spas, specifically on the med spa side. So I think for anyone out there that's running those practices, try and differentiate, right? Work hard, take pride in differentiating, right? This is not something where we can now just lean back and rely on the demand, because the demand has kind of been served for the most part, right? I think we've already starting to see a big clearing out of med spas that, just can't make it, whether it's they're not running the business great or they just don't have the local demand to hold up their practice. We've already started to see that. But I think, again, if you can create raving fans in your practice, that's how you mitigate the risk of a downturn, right? Because even someone who may be cutting back a little bit on spend, whatever it might be, if you've built a relationship with that consumer, they will come back. They will send their friends and family, right? Like, that's the core thing that we should do here. And you always say back to the people, right? If we can really focus on the people, on that consumer experience, your practice will be just fine, right? It's when you get away from that and you start looking at KPIs that are not about the patient, right? And not with the patient's best interest in mind, that's when you start getting into trouble.
You heard it from him, guys, and he has all the data. So, when is the 2025 New Beauty report going to be coming out?
So we just did the studies last week, actually. We got some incredible data that we're sifting through now, building out the reports. It will be available. It'll be polybagged with the winter issue of New Beauty, which will be coming out in February. If you're not receiving it, and 25,000 practices across the country are receiving the State of Aesthetics, so it has a large reach. If you're not, you can always email info@newbeauty.com and make sure you get on the list. But yes, February, the next State of Aesthetics will be out, and we have some really exciting announcements right around that time for some additional partnerships in that space.
This is all awesome. Guys, big round of applause, even though you guys were just listening. But Mike, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And we're so excited for everything that New Beauty continues to contribute to the space and for the new report coming out in 2025.
Thank you for having me.
Want more clarity like this? Join the Branded Practice newsletter community. I write about strategy, systems, and brand leadership straight to your inbox. Go to diamondhandsmedia.com to sign up. And if this episode hit, share it with someone still building without a brand. This is the Diamond Hands Podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go lead.